Good evening, America. I am coming to you tonight with a story that is shaking the foundations of global power, threatening the world economy, and putting American lives and American interests directly in the crossfire. What is happening between the United States, Israel, and Iran right now is not just a Middle East conflict. It is a crisis that touches your gas prices, your national security, and the future of American leadership in the world. Stay with me, because tonight we are breaking all of it down. Let us start from the very beginning, because to understand where we are today on May 22nd, 2026, you need to understand exactly how we got here and why every decision made in the coming days will echo through history for decades to come. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched what became one of the most dramatic military operations of the 21st century. In a coordinated assault spanning just 12 hours, American and Israeli forces carried out nearly 900 strikes against Iran. The targets were not random. They were carefully selected to destroy Iran's missile arsenal, its air defense systems, its military infrastructure, and the very heart of its leadership. And they succeeded in ways that shocked even the most seasoned military analysts. Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, a man who had ruled Iran with an iron fist for decades, was killed in those strikes. Dozens of other top officials died alongside him. The Iranian government was decapitated in a single night. But here's what America also needs to know. In those same strikes, a missile hit a girls' school adjacent to a naval base in the southern Iranian city of Manab, near Bandar Abbas. Approximately 170 people were killed, many of them children. That single moment became a defining image of this war, one that has fueled protests across Europe, outrage at the United Nations, and deep division right here in the United States Congress. War is never clean, and this one is no exception. Iran did not go quietly. In the days and weeks that followed, Tehran launched a series of devastating counterstrikes against Israel, against American military bases across the region, and against civilian and military sites in several Gulf Arab states. The world watched as missiles rained down on multiple fronts simultaneously. Hezbollah, Iran's most powerful regional ally in Lebanon, resumed its attacks against northern Israel, displacing thousands and turning Lebanese towns into war zones. The Houthis in Yemen, emboldened and coordinating with Tehran, began launching ballistic missiles at sensitive Israeli military sites starting in late March. The entire Middle East was on fire. And then Iran made a move that sent shockwaves through every economy on Earth. Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz. For those of you who may not know why that matters, let me put it in terms that hit home. Before this war, approximately 25% of the world's seaborne oil trade passed through the Strait of Hormuz every single day. 20% of the world's liquefied natural gas moved through that narrow waterway. The moment Iran shut it down, global fuel prices began to spike. Energy markets panicked. And the ripple effects began spreading across every continent. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps transmitted warnings across radio channels telling every ship in the region that no vessel was allowed to pass the Strait of Hormuz. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard began boarding merchant ships, attacking commercial vessels, and laying sea mines in the strait. At least 17 merchant ships were damaged. 7 were abandoned. 2 were captured outright. 12 seafarers were killed or went missing. The global shipping industry came to a standstill in one of the most critical waterways on the planet. Kuwait, one of the world's major oil exporters, exported 0 barrels of crude oil during the entire month of April 2026. 0. That had not happened since the end of the Gulf War in 1991. The economic damage from this crisis is not just a number on a spreadsheet. It is real people paying higher prices at the pump, real businesses facing skyrocketing energy costs, and real governments scrambling to find alternative supply routes. President Trump responded aggressively. On March 6th, Trump declared that only Iran's unconditional surrender would be acceptable. He threatened to attack Iranian energy infrastructure and bridges if a deal was not reached, setting a series of deadlines, first March 21st, then March 23rd, then April 7th. On March 19th, the United States began an aerial campaign specifically targeting Iranian naval vessels and drones in the strait, a direct military operation aimed at forcing the waterway back open. By April 13th, the United States Navy had imposed a full naval blockade of Iranian ports, creating what analysts called a dual blockade, with Iran blockading the strait from one side and America blockading Iran from the other. Then came a glimmer of hope. On April 8th, after intense diplomatic maneuvering, the United States and Iran reached a fragile ceasefire framework. Under the terms of that deal, the U.S. and Israel agreed to suspend bombing Iran for 2 weeks, provided Tehran would guarantee safe passage for global maritime traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. Secretary Pete Hegseth said he believed the ceasefire would hold. Secretary of State Marco Rubio went further, declaring that Operation Epic Fury, the full air and naval campaign, was concluded. For a brief moment, it seemed like the worst might be over. It was not over. The diplomacy quickly fell into a dangerous stalemate, and that stalemate is exactly where we find ourselves tonight. Here is what is happening right now as you watch this video. Iran has put forward a new proposal to the United States, delivered through Pakistani mediators who have been serving as the key diplomatic bridge throughout this conflict. The Iranian proposal essentially asks the United States to accept a two-stage deal. Stage 1 would reopen the Strait of Hormuz and end the American naval blockade of Iran. Stage 2, the nuclear question, would be left for later negotiations. Tehran is deeply divided internally about what nuclear concessions, if any, it is willing to put on the table. And by pushing the nuclear issue to a future round of talks, Iran hopes to remove the immediate pressure without making binding commitments on enrichment. But here is the problem, and it is a serious one. President Trump wants Iran to suspend uranium enrichment for at least a decade and remove its enriched uranium from the country entirely. Those are his primary war objectives. If the U.S. lifts the blockade and ends the war before securing those commitments, it loses virtually all of its leverage. The moment the pressure is off, what is stopping Iran from simply walking away from nuclear negotiations? Trump himself has acknowledged this tension, saying he was reviewing the Iranian proposal, but warning that strikes could resume if Tehran misbehaves. There is another complication. The International Atomic Energy Agency, the body responsible for monitoring Iran's nuclear program, has been completely shut out of Iran since this war began. IAEA inspectors have been unable to resume operations inside Iran. They cannot verify what has actually happened to Iran's nuclear infrastructure as a result of the strikes. IAEA Director Rafael Grossi has been blunt about the consequences of this. He has stated clearly that any agreement that does not include provisions for nuclear inspections will be, in his words, an illusion of an agreement. You can sign all the papers you want. If the IAEA cannot get inside Iran to verify compliance, the deal means nothing. And now we come to something that happened just yesterday that every American needs to know about. On Thursday, May 21st, 2026, the United States House of Representatives was scheduled to vote on a war powers resolution brought by Democrats. This resolution would compel President Trump to withdraw from the war with Iran. It was a direct challenge to the president's military authority, and it was gaining momentum. Last week, the House had voted on a similar resolution, and it ended in a 212 to 212 tie, with 3 Republicans breaking from their own party to vote in favor of reining in the war. This week, the Senate had already advanced a related war powers resolution, with 4 Republican senators crossing the aisle to support it. That was a milestone. Democrats had attempted to advance Iran-related measures in the Senate 7 times before and failed every single time. But here is what happened Thursday. As the scheduled House vote approached, Republican leaders realized they did not have the numbers to defeat the resolution. They could not guarantee a win on the floor. And so GOP leaders made the decision to cancel the vote entirely, delaying it into June rather than risk a public defeat that would signal collapsing congressional support for Trump's war. House Republican leader Steve Scalise told reporters the vote was delayed to give absent lawmakers a chance to vote. But the reality was clear to everyone watching. Support in Congress for this war is slipping, and it is slipping fast. This is not just a political story. This is a constitutional story. The war powers question has been at the center of American democracy since Vietnam. Does the president have the right to wage an ongoing military campaign without explicit congressional authorization? Democrats say no. A growing number of Republicans are beginning to agree with them. And the American public is watching a war that has already lasted nearly 3 months with no clear end in sight. Meanwhile, on the ground, the situation in the region continues to deteriorate. Israel, which launched this war alongside the United States, is now facing growing international isolation over its conduct not just in Iran, but in Gaza and Lebanon as well. Let me tell you about something that happened just days ago that provoked outrage from some of America's closest allies. An international activist flotilla, calling itself the Global Sumud Flotilla, attempted to sail to Gaza to deliver humanitarian aid to the nearly 2 million Palestinians who remain in desperate conditions in the Gaza Strip, facing severe shortages of housing, food, and medicine. Israeli naval forces intercepted all the vessels, boarding them in international waters approximately 167 miles from the Gaza coastline. Israeli soldiers destroyed cameras on the vessels. Over 90 activists were detained and later deported back to Turkey. But the story did not end there. Israel's far-right National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir published a video on social media in which he was seen taunting the detained activists as they knelt on the floor with their hands tied. That video caused an immediate international firestorm. Italy, France, the Netherlands, and Canada all summoned Israeli ambassadors to their capitals to formally express what several governments described as indignation. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni called the images unacceptable, saying the activists' human dignity had been violated. Israel's own Prime Minister's office moved quickly to distance itself from Ben-Gvir, with a senior Israeli official saying he would visit leaders of the reform movement in person to apologize on Israel's behalf for the minister's behavior. Israel has since deported hundreds of the flotilla activists, triggering a new wave of international backlash and fresh questions about Israel's conduct under international law. The flotilla incident is now being used by Iran and its allies as propaganda fuel, arguing that the world is witnessing not just a war on Iran, but a broader campaign of aggression against Muslim-majority populations across the region. Back on the diplomatic front, Pakistan continues to play an extraordinary role as the sole mediator between Washington and Tehran. Pakistani military chief general Asim Munir has traveled to Tehran for direct talks, signaling that Islamabad is investing enormous diplomatic capital in brokering a deal. The issues on the table are vast and complex. They include freedom of navigation through the Strait of Hormuz, Iran's nuclear and ballistic missile program, reconstruction funding for Iran's devastated infrastructure, relief from American sanctions, and a framework for a long-term peace agreement. Each of these issues alone would take months of negotiation under normal circumstances. They are all being negotiated simultaneously in real time in the middle of an active war. Iran's new leadership is also a factor that cannot be overlooked. Following the assassination of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei in the February 28th strikes, Iran appointed Khamenei's son as his successor. The new Supreme Leader is entering a role of extraordinary power under the most difficult circumstances imaginable. His country has been bombed extensively. Its military infrastructure has been severely damaged. Its economy is under dual blockade. Its regional proxy network has been disrupted. And internally, the new leadership is deeply divided about how far to bend in negotiations with the United States. Hardliners within the Iranian system are pushing back against any nuclear concessions, arguing that giving up enrichment would represent a fundamental surrender of Iranian sovereignty and deterrence capability. Moderates within the system argue that without a deal, Iran faces complete economic collapse. The broader regional picture adds another layer of danger. Iran has established what it is calling a Persian Gulf Strait Authority, posting on social media that there will be what it terms a controlled maritime zone at the Strait of Hormuz. The zone runs along defined geographic lines connecting points in Iran and the UAE. What this means in practice is that Iran is attempting to institutionalize its control over one of the world's most critical shipping lanes, transforming what was an act of war into what Tehran wants the world to see as a permanent administrative fact. The United States and its allies have rejected this framing entirely. But the mere existence of such a declaration signals that Iran is not simply waiting for a deal. It is trying to reshape the rules of the game. The economic consequences are cascading across the globe. Europe is facing an energy shock that is weighing on growth forecasts and pushing inflation higher across the continent. Shipping insurance rates have skyrocketed. Alternative routing around the Cape of Good Hope adds weeks to delivery times and massive additional fuel costs. Supply chains that were already fragile after years of disruption are being stretched to their breaking point. And ordinary Americans are feeling it, not just in gas prices, but in the broader inflationary pressure that comes from disrupted global energy markets. So where does this leave us tonight? America is fighting a war that is nearly 3 months old in a region where the stakes could not be higher, with a Congress that is increasingly fractured over the president's authority to continue that war, with a diplomatic process that is stuck in a dangerous standoff over the sequencing of nuclear and shipping negotiations, with an ally in Israel that is generating unprecedented international backlash, and with a ceasefire that is holding only barely and could shatter at any moment. The IRGC has warned publicly that the conflict may resume. They say Iran is fully prepared to restart hostilities if diplomatic progress collapses. President Trump has said the same thing from the American side, warning that strikes could resume if Iran misbehaves. Both sides are standing at the edge of a cliff, looking at each other, waiting to see who blinks first. What happens next will determine not just the fate of the Middle East, but the trajectory of American power, global energy security, and the nuclear order that has kept the world from catastrophe for the past 80 years. This is not background noise. This is the defining story of our time. And I have to ask you directly tonight, because your voice matters, because this channel exists to give you the truth and let you decide what you think. Do you believe President Trump should continue this war until Iran fully surrenders its nuclear program? Or do you think Congress should step in and force a diplomatic solution before this conflict spirals into something no one can control? Drop your answer in the comments right now. Let us have this conversation together, because this is your country, your future, and your decision to make. I read every single comment, and I will be responding. Tell me what you think. Before we close tonight, here are 5 of the most credible sources you can go to right now to follow this story and verify everything we have discussed. Source 1 is the Associated Press, available at apnews.com. The AP has reporters on the ground across the region and has been providing accurate, real-time updates throughout this conflict. Source 2 is Al Jazeera English at aljazeera.com. Al Jazeera has maintained some of the most comprehensive live coverage of the Iran-US-Israel conflict, with detailed reporting on diplomatic developments, humanitarian conditions, and regional reactions. Source 3 is Axios at axios.com. Axios has broken several key stories about the diplomatic negotiations between the U.S. and Iran, including exclusive reporting on the Iranian proposal to prioritize Hormuz reopening before nuclear talks. Source 4 is Britannica's 2026 Iran War reference page at Britannica.com. For a clear fact-checked overview of the conflict's timeline, key events, and background context, Britannica's reference entry is one of the most reliable resources available. Source 5 is the House of Commons Library Research Briefing on the 2026 Iran War and ceasefire negotiations, available at commonslibrary.parliament.uk. It may seem unusual to cite a British government research document, but this briefing is one of the most thoroughly sourced and balanced analytical summaries of the diplomatic process, covering every stage of the U.S.-Iran talks in precise detail. This is Nation Alert Official. I am your host. Stay alert, stay informed, and I will see you in the next one.